I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. Whatever you think you know about the war, the one they're still calling the global conflict on the news, the one with the footage and the maps and the sanctions and the breathless coverage that played on loop for weeks, it's not the whole story. I know that sounds insane. I know it sounds like conspiracy theorist nonsense, like the kind of thing someone posts at 3 a.m. on forums nobody reads, the kind of person who sees patterns in static and meaning in coincidence. But I need you to hear me. I was there. I saw what came before the first missile, before the first headline, before the world started tearing itself apart in ways that made sense to people watching from their living rooms. I saw the moments in between, the silences that shouldn't have been there, the things that moved in the dark when everyone was looking at the sky. I saw what was underneath. And if you're reading this, you need to know. The war didn't start the way they told you. The war was a response. A desperate, terrified response to something that had already won before the first shot was fired. The war was just a screaming into the void. And the void screaming back. It was a Tuesday when the notification started. That's what I remember most clearly. Not the content of the alerts at first, just the sound. That sharp, insistent buzz that cuts through everything else, through music, through thought, through the thin membrane of normalcy we'd all been clinging to since the world went sideways a few years back. I was at my apartment, working from home like I had been for the better part of 2 years. The world had normalized isolation by then. Lockdowns had trained us to stay inside, to trust our screens more than our neighbors, to communicate through walls of glass and plastic and the cold glow of LED displays. So when the messages started rolling in, border skirmish, military buildup, emergency UN meeting, it felt serious but distant. Like something happening on a different planet. A problem for other people. The kind of thing you watch with concern but don't actually feel because it's wrapped in so many layers of media and commentary and analysis that the reality of it never quite reaches you. My phone buzzed. Then my laptop. Then my phone again. Breaking. Multiple nations mobilize forces. Breaking. Markets in freefall. Breaking. Evacuation orders issued for coastal regions. Breaking. White House to address nation at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I muted the news after the fifth alert and went back to work. I had a report due. Something about quarterly projections and market trends, the kind of meaningless corporate busywork that keeps the gears turning even when the machine itself is falling apart. What else was I supposed to do? Panic buying had already emptied half the grocery stores. Social media was a wasteland of misinformation and people screaming at each other in all caps about whose fault it was, about who started it, about whether this was the end or just another crisis we'd survive, and then promptly forget. I'd learned during the pandemic that the best way to survive a crisis was to stay calm, stay informed, and avoid the noise. But the noise was getting louder. By evening, my street was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I lived in a decent neighborhood, not wealthy, but comfortable. Tree-lined streets, small restaurants, a coffee shop on the corner that I'd never been inside but had always meant to try. The kind of place where people walked their dogs and jogged at sunset and occasionally said hello to strangers. Not that night. That night, there were no cars. No voices. No dogs barking. Just the distant hum of a helicopter somewhere to the east and, somewhere farther away, the low wail of a siren that didn't seem to be moving. I stood at my window for a long time, looking down at the empty sidewalk, the darkened storefronts, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one.
Green.
Yellow.
Red.
Green again. A perfect rhythm for a world that had stopped moving. I checked my phone. 17 new alerts. I didn't read any of them. That's when I got the first call. Unknown number. No caller ID. I almost didn't answer. I never answered unknown numbers. Not anymore. Not after years of spam calls and robotic voices trying to sell me extended warranties on cars I didn't own. But something about the silence outside made me pick up. Some instinct I didn't understand. Like my body knew something my brain hadn't figured out yet. I pressed accept and held the phone to my ear.
Static.
Just static, crackling and hissing like an old radio stuck between stations. I said hello twice, then hung up. Spam call, I told myself. Bad connection. The networks were probably overloaded with everyone trying to call their families, checking in, making sure everyone was safe. I set my phone face down on the table and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking. It rang again 30 seconds later. Same number. Same static. And then, underneath it, a voice. I couldn't make out words. It was too distorted, too layered, like multiple people speaking at once through water. But the tone was unmistakable. Urgent. Pleading. And then, just before I hung up, one word came through clearly enough that I felt it in my chest like a physical thing. Inside. I turned off my phone and went to bed with every light in the apartment on. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was the stress, the anxiety, the normal human response to watching the world catch fire in real time. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. I was listening. Listening to the silence outside my window. Listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the creak of the building settling and the distant, barely there sound of something that might have been wind or might have been something else entirely. Listening for the voice to come back. It didn't. Not that night. I woke up on the couch at 6 a.m., my neck stiff and my mouth dry. I hadn't meant to fall asleep. The last thing I remembered was staring at my phone screen, scrolling through news articles and forum posts and increasingly frantic social media updates, trying to piece together what was actually happening from the fragments of information that cut through the noise. The consensus, if you could call it that, was chaos. Some outlets were calling it World War III. Others were more cautious, using phrases like international incident and escalating tensions. The footage that made it through grainy cell phone videos, satellite images, official military releases, showed smoke rising from cities I'd never heard of, naval fleets moving into position, fighter jets carving contrails across empty skies. But no battles. No explosions. No bodies. Just movement. Preparation. The slow, inevitable build-up to something everyone knew was coming but nobody wanted to name. I made coffee and checked my work email. 43 unread messages. The first dozen were the usual, meeting reminders, project updates, someone complaining about the formatting in a shared document. Then, around 11 p.m. the night before, they changed. Office closed until further notice, emergency protocols in effect. All staff to work remotely, await further instructions. Do not report to the building. This is not a drill. I set my phone down and looked out the window. The street was still empty. The traffic lights still cycling. But something had changed. It took me a moment to figure out what. The birds were gone. I lived on the third floor of a building that backed up against a small park. Just a patch of grass and some trees. Nothing special, but enough to attract pigeons and crows and the occasional hawk. They were always there. Always making noise. Cooing and cawing and rustling in the branches. Not that morning. The trees stood silent and still, their branches bare against a gray sky. No movement. No sound. I told myself they'd migrated early. That the noise from the helicopters had scared them off. That there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I was being paranoid. I didn't believe it. By noon, the power started flickering. Just for a second at a time, long enough to notice, short enough to dismiss. My laptop screen would go dark, then flicker back to life. The lights would dim, then brighten. The refrigerator would stop humming, then start again with a loud mechanical groan. I checked the news. Rolling blackouts, they said. Power grid under strain from military operations and emergency protocols. Expected to continue for the foreseeable future. Residents advised to conserve electricity, stock up on batteries, stay calm.
Stay calm.
That phrase was everywhere now. In every official statement, every news broadcast, every public service announcement. Like if they said it enough times, it would become true. I spent the afternoon mapping the blackouts.
I don't know why.
Maybe because I needed something to do with my hands, some way to feel like I had control over a situation that was spiraling into chaos. Maybe because some part of me, the part that still believed in patterns and cause and effect, thought there might be an explanation buried in the data. I used an old printout of a city map I'd found in a drawer, marking the outage zones with a red pen based on reports from local news sites and social media. At first, it looked random. Scattered dots across the grid, no rhyme or reason. But by evening, a pattern started to emerge. The blackouts weren't random. They were moving, starting from the industrial district to the north, then spreading south in a slow, methodical arc. Not following power lines or infrastructure. Following something else. Following a path. I drew a line connecting the dots. It cut straight through residential neighborhoods, across the river, through the downtown core. And if the pattern held, if it kept moving at the same pace, it would reach my building in 2 days. I told myself I was seeing things that weren't there, that I was letting paranoia get the better of me. That correlation wasn't causation, and I was connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. I folded up the map and put it back in the drawer. That night, at exactly 9:47 p.m., every phone in the building started ringing at once. I could hear them through the walls. A dozen different ringtones, a dozen different voices answering, and then silence. The kind of silence that comes after something terrible has been said. The kind that rings in your ears long after the sound has stopped. My phone didn't ring. I'd left it turned off since the night before. But I heard the voice anyway. It came through the walls, through the floor, through the air itself, vibrating in my chest like a subsonic frequency tuned to the exact resonance of human bone. And this time I understood what it was saying. Don't go outside. The power went out completely on day 3. Not everywhere. Just sections of the city, rolling blackouts that lasted hours at a time. My building lost power at 6 a.m. I woke up to darkness and silence. No hum from the refrigerator, no glow from the digital clocks, no ambient noise from the street below. Just pure, complete absence of sound. I got out of bed and went to the window. The streetlights were still on. All of them. Even though every building on the block was dark. Even though the traffic lights had stopped working and the storefronts were black and the whole world seemed to have shut down except for those lights, burning bright and steady like nothing had changed. The lights were on, but there were no people. Anywhere. I stood at that window for 20 minutes, searching for movement. A car. A pedestrian. A stray cat. Anything. But the street below was empty in a way that felt wrong, like a photograph or a movie set. Too perfect.
Too still.
I was about to turn away when I saw it. A figure, standing at the corner. Too far away to make out details, but I could see the shape, tall, motionless, facing my building. It didn't move, didn't shift weight or look around or do any of the small unconscious things that living bodies do. It just stood there. I stepped back from the window. When I looked again 5 minutes later, it was gone. My neighbor knocked on my door that evening. An older woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who I'd spoken to maybe 3 times in the 2 years I'd lived there. Brief conversations in the hallway about the weather or the building's temperamental heating system. She'd always seemed kind.
Tired, maybe.
The kind of tired that comes from living through too much history. She looked worse now.
Pale.
Thinner than I remembered. Her gray hair was uncombed, and her clothes hung loose on her frame, like she'd lost weight in the span of days. She kept glancing down the hallway like she expected someone to be standing there. "Have you heard it?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse. Raw, like she'd been screaming. I didn't know what she meant. I told her I'd heard the sirens, the helicopters, the occasional distant boom that could have been thunder or explosions or something else entirely. She shook her head, hard enough that her whole body moved with it. "Not that," she said. The voice. On the radio. On the TV. Sometimes just in the air, like it's coming from everywhere at once. "Have you heard it?" I felt something cold move through my chest. I thought about the phone call. The static. The single word that had cut through the noise. "What does it say?" I asked. Mrs. Alvarez looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were red, bloodshot, like she hadn't slept in days. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It tells you to go outside. It says there's help coming. It says if you just step outside, everything will be okay. The war will stop. The power will come back on. Everything will go back to normal. You just have to open the door and walk out." She paused, and I saw her hands shaking. My husband listened to it. 2 days ago. He said he was going out to check on the car. He never came back. "Did you call the police?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. The police don't come anymore. Nobody comes anymore. The phones work, but nobody answers. The lines are all busy or the messages just repeat. Stay inside.
Stay calm.
Help is coming. But help isn't coming. Nothing is coming except that voice, telling you to go outside. What do you think it is? I asked. She looked at me like I was a child asking a question I should already know the answer to. I think, she said slowly, that whatever is out there isn't human. And I think it's hungry. And then she turned around and walked back to her apartment without another word. I locked my door. I checked the locks twice, then a third time for good measure. I went in my window and looked down at the street, and for the first time I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were footprints. Not on the sidewalk. On the street itself, where no one should be walking. Dark marks pressed into the asphalt like it was mud. They came from the direction of the park, crossed the intersection, and stopped at the base of my building. Just stopped. No return path. No continuation. Like whatever made them had simply vanished. Or climbed. I closed the curtains and stepped away from the window. That night, I heard Mrs. Alvarez screaming. It was 2 a.m. A raw, desperate sound that cut through the silence like a knife. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, rising and falling, and then it stopped. Abruptly. Mid-sound. I went to my door and pressed my ear against it, listening. Silence. I stood there for 10 minutes, barely breathing, waiting for the screaming to start again, or for footsteps, or for any sign of what had happened. Nothing. In the morning, I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and pressed my ear to the wood. I couldn't hear anything. Not even the sound of a TV or the hum of a refrigerator. Just silence. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. But the silence was worse than the fear, and I needed to know if she was still there. If anyone was still there. The apartment was empty. Not just empty, like she'd left. Empty like no one had ever lived there. The furniture was gone. The pictures on the walls were gone. The carpet looked decades older, stained and worn in places where I remembered it being clean. The air smelled like mildew and something else, something organic and rotten that made my throat close up. I backed out of the apartment, my heart hammering in my chest. And that's when I saw the message, written on the wall across from her door, in something dark and smeared that I didn't want to look at too closely. The letters were uneven, dripping, like whoever wrote them had been in a hurry. Or in pain. 2 words. They listened. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and didn't leave for 2 days. The broadcasts started on day 5. Not official ones. Not the emergency alerts or the news channels looping the same footage of smoke rising over distant cities, of military convoys moving through empty streets, of government officials giving carefully worded statements about national security and international cooperation. These were different. They came through everything, the TV, the radio, even my laptop speakers when it wasn't connected to anything. A low-frequency hum that you felt in your teeth before you heard it with your ears. It would start slowly, building from nothing to something, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with it. And then the voice. The same voice from a phone call. The same layered, distorted sound, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. But clearer now. Almost understandable. It said, "Do not trust the shelters." Then static. Then silence. I pulled up every news site I could find, every forum, every social media feed that was still active. The internet was getting slower, pages taking minutes to load, some sites not loading at all. But I found others. Hundreds of people posting the same thing. Thousands. All saying they'd heard the voice. All saying it had told them something different. Stay inside. Go to the water. They are not coming to help you. The war is not what you think. Your family is waiting for you outside. The air is safe now. Trust no one who tells you to stay. Some people thought it was a hoax. Hackers exploiting the chaos, playing a sick prank. Others thought it was a weapon, psychological warfare, a new kind of mass manipulation designed to destabilize populations from the inside out. The conspiracy theorists said it was proof the government was lying, that the war was fake, that something else was happening, and we were all being kept in the dark. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that Mrs. Alvarez's apartment had been silent for 2 days. All I knew was that every time I looked out my window, there were more of those figures in the street. More of those tall, motionless shapes, standing in places where people should be, but weren't. All I knew was that I was running out of food. I'd been rationing what I had, making meals out of crackers and canned soup and the half bag of rice I found in the back of the cupboard. But it wouldn't last more than a few days. Eventually, I would have to leave. Eventually, I would have to go outside. The thought made me sick. That evening, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the normal footsteps of neighbors coming home or going out. These were slow, deliberate, heavy enough that I could feel them through the floor. They would stop at each door, pause for what felt like an eternity, and then move on. I held my breath when they stopped at mine. The door handle turned.
Slowly.
Deliberately. Testing the lock. I sat frozen on the couch, watching the handle move.
Up. Down.
Up again. The deadbolt held, but I could hear something on the other side of the door. Breathing. Low and wet and rhythmic, like lungs working through fluid. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard the voice. Not through a radio or a phone or the air itself. Right there. Inches away. It said, "Let us in." Not "let me in." "Let us in." Multiple voices. Multiple somethings. Waiting. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and my hands pressed over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The handle turned again.
Once. Twice.
Testing. Searching for weakness. And then it stopped. The footsteps moved on. Down the hall. To the next door. The next apartment. The next person who might be foolish enough to open up. I stayed there until sunrise, listening to those footsteps move through the building. Listening to doors opening. To voices, human voices, saying hello, and who's there, and then screaming. And then silence. In the morning, I finally opened my door. There was something on the floor outside. A phone.
Old.
Rusted, like it had been sitting in water for years. The screen was cracked but still glowing faintly with a sickly green light. I almost left it there. Almost closed the door and pretended I hadn't seen it. But curiosity, that terrible human compulsion to know, to understand, made me pick it up. There was one message on it. From my own number. Sent 2 weeks ago. Before any of this started. Before the notifications and the war and the empty streets. The message said, "They're not here because of the war. The war started because they're here. We saw them coming and we panicked, and we thought if we killed each other fast enough they'd be satisfied. We were wrong. They were never here to conquer. They were here to clean up." I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a crack, and the screen went dark. I stood there in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to process what I'd just read. The war wasn't the cause. It was the effect. Humanity's desperate, terrified response to something we couldn't comprehend. We'd turned on each other not out of aggression but out of fear. We'd thought we could distract them, slow them down, buy ourselves time. But they didn't care about our wars. They didn't care about our borders or our politics or our desperate attempts to make sense of the senseless. They were just waiting. Waiting for us to finish destroying ourselves so they could move in. I stopped sleeping after that. Not consciously. I tried. I would lie in bed and close my eyes and tell myself that everything was fine, that the war was just a war, that people were panicking and things would get back to normal eventually. But my body wouldn't let me. Every time I started to drift off, I would hear it. The hum. It was always there now. Low and constant, vibrating through the walls and floor and the bones of the building itself. During the day, I could almost ignore it. I would turn on music when the power was on, or open the windows to let in street noise. Except there was no street noise anymore. The city was dying. Slowly. Quietly. Like something was draining it from the inside out. The few cars that had been parked on the street were gone now. The traffic lights had stopped working entirely. The storefronts were dark and some of them had their windows broken, glass scattered on the sidewalk, doors hanging open like mouths. But the streetlights were still on. always on. Like they were markers. Beacons. Showing the way. The news said evacuations were ongoing. That military convoys were moving civilians to secure zones, that aid was being distributed, that everything was under control. But the footage didn't match the words. I watched the same clips play over and over again. Empty highways, abandoned checkpoints, supply trucks sitting motionless on the side of the road with their doors open and no one inside. Where was everyone going? And more importantly, why weren't they coming back? I spent hours watching those clips, looking for clues. For some sign that the official narrative was true, that help was coming, that there was a plan. But all I saw was absence. Empty spaces where people should be. The negative space of humanity. On the 7th night, I made a decision. I would leave. Pack a bag, get in my car, drive until I hit a town that still had lights and people and some semblance of normal life. I didn't care where. I just needed to get out. The walls of my apartment were closing in, the air getting thicker, the hum getting louder. If I stayed much longer, I would lose my mind. Or worse. I packed quickly. Changes of clothes, bottles of water, the last of my food, my laptop, my phone, a flashlight, a knife from the kitchen that I told myself was for opening packages, but knew was for something else. I made it to the parking garage. My car was still there, untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust. The garage was dark except for the exit signs glowing green at either end. Emergency lighting. Battery-powered. Meant to last for days in case of power failure. They were still burning. I opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. The interior smelled stale and used. I put the key in the ignition and took a deep breath. And then I heard it. The radio. It wasn't on. I hadn't turned it on. But static poured through the speakers anyway, filling the car with white noise. I reached for the volume knob to turn it off. The voice stopped me. Not distorted this time. Not layered. Just one voice.
Clear. Human.
And very, very close. It said, "You can't leave." My hand froze on the knob. "We've been watching you. We know you want to run. We know you're afraid. But there's nowhere to run to. Everywhere is here now. Everywhere is us." I pulled my hand back. The others didn't understand. They fought. They ran. They tried to hide. But you're different. You're still listening. That means there's hope for you. Hope for what? I said, before I could stop myself. The voice didn't answer for a long moment. And then, integration. I turned off the car, pulled the key from the ignition, sat in the dark listening to my own breathing and the static that wouldn't stop no matter how many times I pressed the power button. Finally, the static cut out. The silence that followed was worse. I got out of the car and walked back upstairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone braver. Someone who hadn't just spoken to the void and heard it speak back. When I reached my floor, there were footprints in the hallway.
Wet. Dark.
Leading from the stairwell to my door. I followed them with my eyes, my heart hammering in my chest. They stopped at my door, and then continued past it, but that wasn't possible. I'd locked it. I'd checked it twice before going downstairs. I approached slowly, key in hand. The door was still locked, but the footprints led inside anyway. Through the solid wood, through the impossible space between locked and open. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The footprints continued across my living room, into the bedroom, and stopped at the window. The window that was now open. I hadn't opened it. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Locked it.
Put the chain on.
Pushed my couch in front of it, for good measure. The footprints were still there in the morning. But they were dry now. And they led away from the window and back to the door. Like something had come in, looked around, and decided to wait. I saw the first one on day 9. I don't know what else to call it. A person, maybe. Or something that had been a person once, before something else got inside, and wore them like a suit. It was standing in the street below my window, perfectly still, in the middle of the intersection. I'd been watching the street for hours by that point, the way you watch a horror movie through your fingers, not wanting to look but unable to look away. There hadn't been a single car, a single person, a single sign of life. And then it was just there.
Tall.
Too tall. The proportions were wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, but felt in my gut. Its arms hung at its sides and its head was tilted back, like it was looking up at the sky.
Or at me.
I stepped away from the window, counted to 60, forced myself to breathe slowly. When I looked again 5 minutes later, it was gone.
But there were more of them now. 3, 4.
Standing in different places around the intersection, all of them perfectly still, all of them facing the same direction. Toward my building, toward my window, like they knew exactly where I was. I closed the curtains and turned off all the lights. That night, I heard footsteps in the hallway again. Not the shuffle of someone walking, the slow, deliberate thud of something heavy moving from door to door. It would stop at each one, pause, and then move on. But this time, it didn't just test the handles. This time, I heard knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on each door.
Pause.
Then 3 more. Like a rhythm. Like a code. I held my breath when it stopped at mine. Knock.
Knock.
Knock. Silence. Knock.
Knock. Knock.
And then the door handle turned.
Slowly.
Deliberately. The deadbolt held, but I could hear something on the other side testing it, searching for weakness. The chain rattled. The hinges creaked. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard the voice. Not through a radio or a phone or the air itself. Right there. Inches away. Speaking in a tone that almost sounded friendly. It said, "Let us in. We just want to talk. We have questions. About what it's like.
Being you.
Being alone. Being afraid. We want to understand. We want to help." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and my hands pressed over my mouth to keep from making a sound. "We know you're in there. We can hear you breathing. We can hear your heart beating. We can smell your fear. It's okay to be afraid. Fear is human. Fear is what makes you interesting." The handle turned again.
Once. Twice.
"We've been trying to understand you. For so long. Watching. Listening. Learning. But watching isn't enough anymore. We need to be closer. We need to be inside." I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. The war was supposed to help. We thought if you were afraid of each other, you wouldn't notice us. We thought the chaos would be beautiful, efficient, but you're more resilient than we calculated. You keep fighting.
Keep hoping.
Keep believing there's a way out. The voice paused. There isn't. And then the footsteps moved on. Down the hall. To the next door. The next apartment. The next person who might be listening might be crying, might be praying to gods that had stopped answering. I stayed there until sunrise, listening to those footsteps move through the building. Listening to doors opening. To voices calling out. To screaming that started and stopped and was replaced by silence. In the morning, I finally opened my door. There was something on the floor outside.
Not a phone this time.
A photograph.
Of me.
Sleeping in my bed. Taken from inside my apartment. Through the window I'd found open. The image was wrong somehow, distorted, like it had been taken through water or warped glass. My face looked hollow.
Empty.
Like something had already been scooped out. On the back, written in the same dark substance as the message outside Mrs. Alvarez's door, were 3 words. "Soon you'll understand." I started listening to the broadcasts after that. Really listening. Not the news. Not the emergency channels that played the same recorded messages on loop, telling people to stay calm and stay inside, and help was coming even though everyone knew by now that help wasn't coming, had never been coming, would never come. I listened to the other ones. The static-filled frequencies that shouldn't exist, that weren't on any official dial. The number stations that looped endlessly in languages I didn't recognize. The voices that whispered coordinates and warnings and things that sounded like prayers or spells or instructions for something I didn't want to understand. There was one that played every night at 3 a.m. I'd found it by accident, scrolling through the dial on an old radio I'd pulled from a closet. I don't know why I still had it. A relic from college, probably. The kind of thing you keep meaning to throw away, but never quite get around to. It was a woman's voice.
Calm.
Professional. The kind of voice you'd hear on a weather report or a public service announcement. Authoritative, but not unkind. she said. If you are hearing this, you are in a compromised zone. Do not go outside. Do not answer the door. Do not respond to familiar voices. Repeat, do not respond to familiar voices.
They are not who they sound like. We do not know what they are. We do not know what they want.
But we know they are not human. Not anymore.
Pause. Static.
The war is a distraction. Please understand. The war is a distraction. They needed us focused elsewhere. They needed us afraid of each other. So, we wouldn't notice them. So, we wouldn't see what was happening until it was too late. Another pause. It is too late. And then the broadcast would cut off. Static. Then silence. I played it again the next night.
Same time.
Same frequency. The message was different. The woman's voice was gone. In its place was something else. Something that sounded like 1,000 voices speaking in perfect unison, layered on top of each other until they became one voice, inhuman and vast and terrible. It said, "We are not the enemy. We are the correction. You were dying before we arrived. Your species, your planet, your reality. Everything was collapsing. We are simply accelerating the process. The war is mercy. Do you understand? The war is mercy. You will thank us when it is over." I reached for the radio to turn it off. The voice continued. "We have been here before. Many times. On many worlds. This is not new. This is not special. This is just another Tuesday for us. Another species that thought they were unique, that thought they mattered. You don't. You're just meat. Just patterns of electricity and chemistry that convince themselves they're important. We're here to remind you of the truth." I yanked the power cord from the wall. The voice kept speaking. "You can't turn us off. We're in the walls. We're in the air. We're in the spaces between your thoughts. We've always been there. You just didn't know it. But now you do. And that changes everything." I smashed the radio against the wall. It shattered into pieces, wires and circuit boards scattering across the floor. The voice kept speaking. From the walls. From the floor. From inside my own head. "We are not the enemy. We are the future. Your future. The only future you have left." I covered my ears and screamed until my throat was raw. The voice laughed. Not cruel. Not mocking. Just amused. Like a parent watching a child throw a tantrum. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Complete. Like the world had been muted. I sat on the floor surrounded by pieces of broken radio and realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't alone in my apartment. I could feel it. A presence. Not in any one place, but everywhere at once. Watching. Waiting. Studying. I looked up slowly. There was something in the corner of the ceiling. Not solid. Not quite. More like a shadow that didn't match any light source. It moved without moving, shifting and flowing like smoke or water or something in between. And it had eyes. Dozens of them. Blinking independently. Watching me. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. But I could still feel it watching. On the 13th day, I saw one of them up close. I'd been avoiding the windows, avoiding the hallways, avoiding every surface that could reflect something I didn't want to see. But the food had run out. The water was almost gone. I'd been rationing it, a few sips at a time, trying to make it last. But eventually the math catches up to you. Eventually you run out of options. I had to leave. The building was empty. I knew that already. But walking through it confirmed something worse. It wasn't just empty. It was wrong. The walls had changed. The paint was peeling in places that had been pristine a week ago, revealing older layers underneath. Wallpaper, plaster, something that looked like raw wood, all of it out of order, out of time. The carpet in the hallway was damp, rotting, like the building itself was decaying faster than it should. The air smelled like copper and mildew and something I couldn't name. Something organic and wrong. I took the stairs. The elevator had stopped working days ago. On the 4th floor landing, I saw it. Standing at the far end of the hallway. Facing me. It looked human. Almost. The height was wrong, like I'd noticed before. 7 feet tall, maybe more. The proportions were off. Arms too long, legs too thin, torso stretched like taffy.
And its face. God, its face.
It was smooth, featureless, like someone had taken a mannequin and stretched skin over it without bothering to add details. No nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin pulled tight over bone. But it had eyes.
Not where eyes should be.
Lower, on its cheeks. And they were moving, blinking independently. All four of them, watching me from different angles. I stood frozen on the landing, my hands still on the railing, my legs refusing to move. It tilted its head, slowly, like it was curious, like it was trying to understand what I was. And then it spoke, not with a mouth. It didn't have a mouth, but the voice came anyway, from everywhere and nowhere, filling the hallway like smoke. You're still here. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up, my vocal cords paralyzed with terror. Most of them are gone now.
Absorbed.
Integrated. Made into something better. But you're still here.
Still you.
Still separate. Why? It took a step toward me. The movement was wrong. Its joints bent at angles that defied anatomy, its legs folding and unfolding like a spider's. Each step made a wet, heavy sound on the carpet. Are you special? Are you different? Or are you just slow? Another step. We've been watching you. Through the windows. Through the walls. Through the gaps in your thoughts when you sleep. You're interesting. You're aware. You know something is wrong, but you can't quite articulate it. That must be frustrating. It was halfway down the hall now. Would you like to understand? Would you like us to show you?
It would be easy.
Painless. You would just open your mind and we would come in and everything would make sense. All your questions answered. All your fears resolved. You would be part of something larger than yourself. Something that matters. I found my voice.
No.
The word came out as a whisper, but it was enough. The thing stopped. All four eyes blinked in sequence. No.
No.
It tilted its head the other way. Considering. Interesting. Most of them say yes. Most of them beg for it by the end. But you're different. You're still fighting. Still holding on to the illusion of self. Of autonomy. Of choice. It laughed. The sound was wrong. Too many voices at once, like a choir out of sync with itself. There is no choice. There never was. You were always going to end up here. Standing in this hallway. Facing us. Saying no. And then saying yes. It's just a matter of time. I turned and ran. It didn't follow. It didn't need to. Because when I reached the lobby and looked out through the glass doors, they were everywhere.
Dozens of them.
Hundreds. Standing in the street. In the parking lot. On the sidewalk. On the roofs of cars. Some were tall, like the one in the hallway. Others were smaller, hunched, moving on all fours like animals. All of them perfectly still. All of them facing the building. Facing me. And in the center of the street, there was something else. Something larger. Something that hurt to look at. Its body flickered like a broken hologram, shifting between forms, human, animal, something else entirely, something that didn't have a name in any language spoken on Earth. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Just being there was enough. I felt it then. The pull. The same pull Mrs. Alvarez must have felt. The same pull that had emptied the city, one person at a time. A voice in my head that wasn't my own, whispering that it was okay to go outside. That I was safe. That they were here to help. That if I just opened the door and stepped out into the light, everything would be fine. Better than fine. Perfect. That the war was over and we had lost, and that was fine. That was the plan all along. That resistance was just fear, wearing a different mask. That I was tired. So, very tired. And it was okay to rest now. To let go. To stop being me and become part of something greater. I backed away from the doors. And I ran. I'm in the basement now. I don't know how long I've been down here.
Days, maybe.
The power is still out. My phone is dead. The only light comes from a flashlight I found in a maintenance closet, and the batteries are dying. Maybe an hour left. Maybe less. But I'm not alone. There are others down here. Not many. 6, maybe 7. It's hard to tell in the dark. People who didn't listen to the broadcasts, who didn't go outside, who barricaded themselves in the dark and waited for rescue that never came. We don't talk much. There's not much to say. We share what little food we have, a can of beans someone had in their apartment, crackers that have gone stale, warm bottles of water that taste like plastic. We take turns sleeping, though none of us really sleep anymore. Just close our eyes and pretend. But last night, one of them broke the silence. A man in his 50s.
Thin.
Balding. Wire-rimmed glasses that were cracked on one side. He used to be a professor, I think. Or maybe a scientist. Something academic. He has that look about him, the kind of person who thought knowledge could save them. He pulled out a laptop.
Old. Battered.
But it still had battery. He'd been hoarding power, saving it for something important. He said he'd been monitoring military transmissions. Encrypted ones. The kind that aren't meant for civilians. He had software, he said. Tools he developed back when he still believed the world made sense. He showed me what he'd found.
Dates. Times.
Coordinates. The war didn't start 3 weeks ago. It started 6 months ago. Before the first missile. Before the first news report. Before any of us knew what was happening. The governments knew. The militaries knew. They'd been coordinating in secret, launching attacks on empty cities, staging battles in places that had already been evacuated, creating casualties that didn't exist, generating footage of destruction that was carefully controlled. It was all theater. They were buying time,
Trying to slow it down.
trying to understand what had arrived. The professor scrolled through page after page of intercepted messages, military jargon, technical specifications, coordinates of engagement zones. And then, buried in the data, something else. A report. Heavily redacted. But enough words left intact to understand. Non-human intelligence detected. Origin unknown. Intent unknown. Capabilities beyond current classification. Recommendation: containment via mass distraction protocol. Mass distraction protocol. The war. They'd started the war to keep us busy, to keep us afraid of each other, so we wouldn't notice what was really happening. So we wouldn't look up and see what was in the sky, what was in the spaces between. The professor said the transmission stopped 4 days ago. The last message was a single word, repeated over and over again until the signal cut out. Compromise. He asked me if I understood what that meant. I did. The war wasn't a distraction anymore.
It was a quarantine.
A desperate, failed attempt to contain something that couldn't be contained. And now the people in charge, the ones who were supposed to protect us, were gone. Or worse, turned into something else. The professor closed the laptop. He looked at me for a long time. In the dim light from my dying flashlight, his face looked hollow, empty. Then he said, "They didn't start the war.
We did.
We saw them coming and we panicked and we started killing each other because we thought that would buy us time. We thought they'd be satisfied with the chaos. But they weren't trying to invade. They were trying to clean up." "Clean up what?" I asked. He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound.
Us.
"We're the mess. We've always been the mess. And they're here to wipe the slate clean." I didn't ask him what he meant. I already knew. The hum is louder now. I can feel it in my bones, in my teeth, in the back of my skull, where thoughts used to be. It's not just a sound anymore. It's a presence. A weight pressing down on everything. The others have stopped moving. They sit in the dark with their eyes open, staring at nothing, breathing, waiting. One of them started laughing an hour ago. A woman in her 30s who told me her name on the first day, but I can't remember it now. She hasn't stopped laughing. Just a low, continuous sound that doesn't pause for breath. The professor hasn't moved in 12 hours. He's still sitting with his laptop closed in front of him, his hands folded on top of it like a prayer. His eyes are open, but I don't think he's seeing anything. I'm writing this on the last page of a notebook I found in the maintenance closet. My handwriting is getting worse. My hands won't stop shaking. The flashlight is almost dead.
But I need you to know.
I need someone to know. The war was never about territory or resources or ideology. It was about keeping us busy, keeping us afraid, keeping us from noticing what was happening right in front of us. They didn't invade. They've always been here. In the spaces between. In the gaps we don't look at. In the corners of rooms and the shadows under streetlights and the static between radio stations. We just didn't see them. We didn't want to see them. Because seeing them means accepting that we were never alone. That we were never special. That we were just ants under a magnifying glass, and the child holding it finally got bored of watching us run. And now they're done pretending. I can hear footsteps above me. Slow. Deliberate. Moving through the building like water, through cracks. Coming closer. The voice is back. Not in the walls. Not in the air. In me. It's telling me to go upstairs. To open the door. To step outside where the light is waiting. And the worst part, the part that makes my hands shake as I write this, is that it doesn't feel like a command anymore. It feels like relief. Like I've been waiting my whole life for permission to stop fighting. To stop pretending I'm in control. To finally let go and become part of something larger than myself. The woman next to me has stopped laughing. She's standing now, walking toward the stairs. The others are following. One by one. Moving like sleepwalkers. Like people who've finally remembered where they're supposed to be. I should stop them. I don't. Because I know what's waiting up there. And I know I'm going to follow them. We all are. Not because we're brave. Not because we're curious. But because whatever they are, whatever they want, they've already won. The war was just the sound of the door closing. And we're on the wrong side. I can feel it now. In my chest. In my head. In the space where I used to keep myself. They're not outside anymore. They're inside. They've always been inside. We were just too distracted to notice. I'm putting down the pen now. The flashlight just died. I can hear the others climbing the stairs in the dark, their footsteps echoing off concrete. I should be afraid. I'm not. I'm just tired. So, very tired. And when the voice tells me to follow, I think I will. Not because I have to, but because it's easier than fighting. And maybe that was the point all along. This notebook was found in the basement of a residential building on the north side of the city 3 months after the conflict officially ended. It was the only item recovered. No bodies were found. No survivors located. The building itself was structurally sound but showed signs of advanced decay inconsistent with the timeline, corrosion patterns suggesting decades of aging compressed into weeks. The basement walls bore markings that preliminary analysis suggests are not human in origin. Further investigation was suspended after 3 members of the recovery team reported hearing voices and experiencing visual disturbances consistent with the accounts described in the notebook. The notebook has been logged as evidence. The handwriting has been verified through database matching. The author has been identified as Marcus Chun, age 34, software engineer, no surviving family members. His last known communication was an email to his employer dated 3 days before the documented day 1, reporting he would be working from home due to unusual circumstances in the neighborhood. No such circumstances were reported by authorities at that time. This document is classified level 5. Distribution restricted to authorized personnel only. But if you're reading this, you already know that classification doesn't matter anymore. The broadcast started again last week. Not in the old zones. Everywhere. Every frequency. Every device. Every screen that has ever displayed an image, and every speaker that has ever made a sound. The message is different now. They're not telling us to stay inside anymore. They're not telling us anything. They don't need to. Because when you listen, really listen, you realize something terrible. The voice you're hearing? It's not coming from outside. It never was.